Hello everyone, welcome to a session that covers Proxmox Backup Server, which is an amazing piece of software. You really need one. Trust me, you really need one. What we're going to do to make it interesting is actually a Proxmox Backup Server disaster recovery process, which will involve installing it, which is obviously something you'll be interested in, but at the same time actually recovering backups on a storage device that were previously made. Right, well, we're going to do an install, as I said, but it did occur to me this is kind of fairly boring, to be honest. It's almost identical to installing Proxmox VE, so I thought I'd make it slightly more interesting by showing you that I currently have Proxmox Backup Server installed. Let me show you. So I've got it installed, it's all configured, and let me show you a few things that I've done. The first thing is under access, and I'm going to go through all this, so I know it looks like I'm jumping the gun a bit here. But under access control, we can see we've got a user called John, and that's me. And we've given him certain permissions. So if we go to his permissions, he is limited. Again, I'm going to go over all this, but he's limited to /data store, which is where the backups are. And he is a data store power user, which means he can basically do backups and he can do prune jobs and things like that. But that's all he can do. So this is quite important. This is, for me, this is important security-wise. And it's not what a lot of people do. A lot of people use root for doing the backups, and that's really bad practice. It's always bad practice to use root. Okay, now the other thing is we've got some storage. Now I've got my internal NVMe, which is what Proxmox is installed on and what we will install it on. And I have an external SSD, which is 1 terabyte. Okay, so we've got this dev SDA, which is the device, and a partition SDA1. If we go down and look at backing stores, data stores, I've created a backing store, which is that 1 terabyte SSD. And if we look at that, and we'll go under content. So again, I know I'm whizzing through this, but I just want to show you what I've got here. And I have a plan, a reason for doing this. So we look at the content and we find out there are 8 virtual machines, because that's how many virtual machines I've got on the cluster that we're going to use. And these 8 virtual machines each have a number of backups. What I've actually done is a 2-hourly backup for each machine and limited it to 8 backups. Okay. Why? I don't know. That's what I've done. You'll just have to accept it. Okay, so we've got a load of backups on here, and what this is going to be the story, because we're now going to do a proper installation of Proxmox Backup Server, explaining things as we go along. But let's pretend we're doing this installation because we had a fatal error. Our NVMe, going back to storage disks, let's pretend our NVMe failed. Okay, so we've potentially lost all our backups. Well, I'm going to show you we haven't, because the backups are on a separate disk. Okay, so we're going to reinstall Proxmox on the NVMe and then kind of get it to bring this device back so that we can access our previous backups. That's the plan. Okay, now it's important when you've set Proxmox Backup Server that you actually make notes of important things, like, for instance, the user John, because we're going to need to be able to recreate that user so that we can then continue to use those backups. Now, if we go across and have a look at, well, in this case, for some reason it's connected to Mustang, but that's fine, it's the cluster. So if we go across to our cluster, just show you quickly what I've got. We've got our 4 nodes that you're familiar with. But now, to make the backup slightly more interesting, I've added a few more virtual machines. All of them Linux. I refuse to install a Windows machine. There simply isn't enough time in the day to waste on how long it takes to install Windows. I can't believe it. Whereas I can install Linux in a matter of minutes. Windows seems, possibly because I don't know what I'm doing, but Windows seems to take me forever to install and update, etc., etc. Okay, so that's the plan. All right. Now, at the moment, all these machines have backups. So if we go to backup, we can see we've got various backups for these machines. A really important thing here is that we choose the right storage. And if you look up here, we've actually chosen Kukang, well, it's defaulted to Kukang-VMs. So here I can actually choose PBS01, which is the name I gave to my Proxmox backup server within the cluster. So if I click on that, you can now see those different backups. So if we go to Cobra, for instance, choose one of the VMs, go to backup, again it's gone to Kukang VMs, and I will show you how you can stop it doing that, and we can see our backups, etc, etc. So that's the master plan. We're going to trash Corvette. Corvette, by the way, is the machine name or the host name of the backup server. We're going to trash that, and then we're going to reinstall it. And very importantly, and to make it slightly more interesting than just doing a reinstall, we're going to recover our lost data from the backups that we've got on that disk, which is surprisingly easy to do, but a little bit obscure, which is why I think it's a good exercise to do that. Let's do it now. Okay, here we are over at Corvette, where we've just been looking at the GUI. We're now connected. I'm doing a capture, HDMI capture of the output from it so that we can go down to BIOS level. I've got a stick here with PBS version 4 on it, which, there you go, that proves it. It was even the right way up. We need to plug this in. Oh dear. Just a second. Sorry, there are no USB ports on the front, so it's a bit of a struggle plugging the USB stick in. So we've now done that. So now what we're going to do is basically crash Corvette, reboot it into the BIOS. If I can remember the key sequence, it's a little Lenovo Think Center that we're using here. So let me crash it. Now, this is the Lenovo where, if you remember in, I think it was session 1, is it Escape? Yeah, I was going to say, you get this multicoloured effect, which is fun. The HPs don't do it, only the Lenovo for some reason. There we go. So, I hope you can see that, but we're going to go through this at the speed of light. Okay, I will edit the living daylights out of it so you're not sitting watching it. It's almost identical. In fact, I think it is identical to PVE install, the Proxmox Virtual Environment install. I'm actually installing Proxmox Backup Server 4.0, which is the latest and greatest. And by the way, the cluster is running cluster version 9, which I said I'd never run yet until it's been kind of proven, but what the hell, let's live dangerously. Okay, so first is just a welcome window. We've got the choice of installing the backup server using either the GUI or the terminal UI, and advanced options would allow us to go into some sort of debug mode, and we could return to the BIOS if we needed to change something. So I'm going to hit enter and pause for a second. Okay, that's probably the longest part of the whole process. Where's the mouse? Here we go. Sorry. We've got the ability to, exactly the same as in PVE, to choose which disk we want to install on. Now, we don't want to install on the 1 terabyte drive because that is the drive with our backups on. We want to install on our NVMe. We've got the same options that we had before, basically choosing different types of file system. We're going to choose it. I'm going to choose ext4. You choose whatever you want. And we can also mess about with maximum hard disk size. I'm just going to use the whole disk. So in other words, I'm just defaulting on everything. Click on next. And then here we specify the country, United Kingdom, which will give us the correct time zone, etc. Then we move down to next, put in a password. I'll use my highly secure secret password. And I'll give a email address. It's a dummy one, but it'll do because I'm not giving out my real email address. And we then we can specify which network interface to use. I've only got one, so there you go. We've got to give a name, but it has to be fully qualified, so we'll call it example.com like the rest of the cluster. Give it an IP address. Default gateway is correct, and I'm going to give it the open source DNS server at 999. Click on next, and that's it. All right, that's how exciting it is, which is why I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting by making it a kind of recovery procedure. So check it, it looks fine to me. Click on install, and it's astonishing how quick Proxmox installs because it's a really efficient, stripped down version of Linux, so that's good. So I'll come back to you in a second when that's completed. So we're here and we can see that the restore of the Proxmox backup server was successful. But the only big difference is, notice the address. It says HTTPS IP address colon 8007. So just be aware it uses a different port number. Anyway, enough of this. Let's go across to the web user interface. You'll see that the user interface is actually very similar kind of look and feel to the Proxmox virtual environment, but obviously a lot of different content. Let's have a quick look down it. I know, realize we looked at it once before, but let's quickly look, for instance, at our users. And we can see that we've lost John. Hardly surprising, we've reinstalled. So let's go down and look at our data store. And we've also lost our backing underscore store data store. That's actually worrying because that's where all our backups are. And remember, this exercise is, let's not just install Proxmox backup server. That's trivial. Let's do something clever and actually recover from a disaster. So let's see if we can actually do that. And this turns out to be a little bit obscure. So for instance, if we go to our storage disks, we can see our disks. That's encouraging. They're good. That's our NVMe boot disk. And here we have SDA, and we should remember that because we're going to need to remember in a minute. And it's a 1 terabyte drive. So we look around here and we say, how do I reattach this? And there are no apparent options. Oh, there's reload. That looks promising. We click on reload a few times and nothing happens. No data stores appear magically at the bottom. Reload just means really refresh the partition table just in case anything. You may have changed something, so it's basically saying go and reassess the disk. So that hasn't helped us. So let's actually go from storage disks to data store. And let's look here and see if we can find something that says, add an existing data store, and there's nothing. Let's go to add data store and let's look for an option to actually add an existing data store. Turns out there's nothing. However, if you've got advanced ticked, which I already had, but it isn't normally, it normally looks like this. You'll notice there is an option, reuse existing data store, and that's what we need. But we're not there yet because we can't reuse an existing data store unless it's mounted. So this is the trick actually to recover from this issue, this disaster. We have to actually mount the data store somewhere locally on a directory. So let's do that. I am now logged into Corvette. Corvette is the Proxmox backup server. And what we need to do is first of all make a directory. The name isn't important, but I like to be consistent. So let's call it slash backing underscore store. Make that directory, and then we need to mount our 1 terabyte drive, which was slash dev slash SDA1 onto slash backing store. And that's good, but it's warning us that the system CTL or the system D process will not be aware that we've made a change. So we need to actually reload it. So let's do that. And that's fine. That would have been fine after a reboot, but it's better to just do it there and then. We now need to edit our fstab file, and we need to add an entry at the end for slash dev slash SDA1. We're doing this because we may need to ensure that this disk gets mounted every time we reboot. So let's save that file. Having saved that file, we should now be able to unmount slash backing store and remount it simply by using the mount command and the directory name, and that will test our fstab entry. And we want to just hit return. So now we should have a directory called slash backing underscore store mounted, and it's actually slash dev slash SDA. So meanwhile, back at the browser, we can now add a data store and we can actually give it a name. The name is important. It needs to be the same as it was before, or we're going to have to make changes on our cluster. And we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to just get this back to how it was. So it's backing underscore store. It's an absolute path of backing underscore store. And we want to reuse existing data store. So we add that. It's gone away and it's looking at it. The fact that we said reuse an existing data store means it didn't overwrite it or do any damage to it. So we've now got our backing store back. And if we go and look under backing store and content, we should see a whole bunch of backups. Okay, and we can see a whole bunch of backups. So that's encouraging. However, we had a user called John, so we need to add him back. So we say add a user, call him John. I will put in a password, and the password does not necessarily need to be the same, so that's okay. We can fill in the optional properties. And so we've now created our user. So let's add him. Now, he has certain default permissions, which basically are nothing. So let's have a look at his permissions, and we can see that he has no permissions whatsoever. Okay. If we go back to user management and say show permissions, it appears to say he has access to the root directory, but that's not actually what it means. It's more symbolic. It's access to the root of the Proxmox backup server functionality would be a better way of thinking about it. And if we expand that, well, we see nothing because he has no permissions. So let's add some permissions or a permission. So we select John, go to permissions, and we say add, and we want to add a user permission. Where do we want to allow him access to? Well, we could say slash root, but we're not going to because we're trying to be secure here. We're going to restrict him to any of our data stores, or we could actually restrict him to data store backing store, just the one. But normally you would, if you trust, well, it depends what you want to do, but I'm just going to give him access to data store, mainly because I think that's what I did before, and I want this to be exactly the same as it was before. Um, and then the user that we're actually trying to set permissions for is John at PBS, because he is a Proxmox authenticated user, and he has no access. Now, again, we want to put back the system to how it was before. And I gave him data store power usage, and that means that he can do backups, but he can also do prunes. Now, prunes means he's going to be able to schedule backups that are deleted after a period of time. Um, and so that's important that we give him data store backup and prune. Okay. We could just give him data store backup, but if we only give him that, then he can only create backups. He can't really create schedules or anything like that because he can't say, I want to back up or I want to delete my backups after 3 months or whatever the decision is. The propagate means that if I give him permission to data store, then these permissions are propagated below that virtual directory or below that element of Proxmox backup. So we add him, and now we're beginning to look like we looked before. So if we go to our backing store contents, we can see our backups are here, and everything's looking reasonably okay. So now we need to go to the cluster. So let's go across to the cluster, which I'm already logged into, and let's look. Oh, look! First thing we notice is all the bright red stuff at the bottom, indicating errors. Now I wonder why that is, he said, knowing already. And he's saying, well, I couldn't activate the storage PBS-01. Okay, the Proxmox backup server is treated as if it was effectively a disk drive or some kind of storage in terms of definition. So it's actually basically saying everything's gone horribly wrong. And why is that? And that's because the certificates have changed because we've installed Corvette from scratch. So we need to fix that. So we need to go to data center, and we need to go to storage, and we'll see here that we've got PBS-01 already, but that's from a previous lifetime. The problem is that it has the wrong parameters in it. We can change those, but I want to show you how to create one from scratch. So basically all we need to fix here is this fingerprint, which we could do simply by copying it and putting in the new fingerprint. Okay, but that doesn't show you how you'd create this entry in the first place. So let's actually remove it. I'm going to remove PBS-01. Fine, it's gone now. So now, and this will still work for our recovery, but it's a bit cumbersome way of doing it. What we want to do, if you look down all these different types of file system that we could, or storage that we could add, right at the bottom, there's a Proxmox backup server. So we need to choose that. We need to give it a name, okay? And we do need to give it the same name we gave it before, because if we don't, then we're going to have to start setting up our schedules again and things like that, because it needs to have the same name to recognize the currently created schedules. What server is it? Well, it's 192.168.0.235. And what user do I want? And this is where I frequently see people put root at PAM. In other words, root at pluggable authentication module. In other words, the Linux root user. Well, that's really bad practice because root is all powerful and we want to give access to someone with limited power. So we're going to give root at, and this time slightly cryptically, but root at PBS. And that means, sorry, not root, John at PBS. And the PBS bit means this is not a Linux user. This is a Proxmox backup server authenticated user. So John at PBS, give the password. I nearly told you what it was, and it's a national secret. Very importantly, we've got to give the name of, of the data store, and that has to match. So we called it backing underscore store. And we need to give it the fingerprint of the certificate. So let's go across to Corvette and let's find the fingerprint. It's available in a couple of places, but the easiest place is, oh, hang on a sec. Let me move out of the way so you can actually see there. The easiest place is here under dashboard, show fingerprint. So let's click on that and it will bring up the fingerprint and it has a nice convenient copy button. So we'll click on copy, go back to the cluster and I will paste that back in, add, and that should work. And it appears to have worked. So that's good news. So actually, let me put my head back. So we now appear to have recovered this, but we've got to test it. So, have we recovered successfully? So let's go to backup. Let's choose my backup, which we're going to discuss in a minute when we look at scheduling. But so don't worry about it. I've just got scheduled backups running here. Let's click on run now and see if we get any errors. So run, it says, do you want to do that? That's why I asked you to do it. And we can see at the bottom that it started. And lo and behold, it was surprisingly quick. All right. One of them looks like it. Oh no. Oh yeah, Cobra is the least powerful of all those machines, so that's why it took the longest. How come it? How can it be that quick? I mean, we've got eight virtual machines. Well, the answer is of course because these are incremental or differential backups. So we only back up that which has changed since we last did a backup, which of course is next to nothing because I'm not really using these virtual machines. So it took seconds, and that's great. So we actually have recovered, which is really exciting. And let's just prove that. We go to, for instance, pick a virtual machine, go to backup, and we can see that he has a whole bunch of backups. And that's really good. We can use those backups to do a complete virtual machine restore. So if I click on restore, or we can do a file restore, which is really neat. So this is really cool. So you can see here that we've got our SCSI disk. This is the virtual SCSI disk for the virtual machine. And we've got our logical volume manager. And if we click on that, we've got our Ubuntu volume group. And if we click on that, within that volume group, we've got one volume, Ubuntu LV, Ubuntu logical volume. And if we click on that, we see all the files that we've actually backed up. So that's really good. So if I want to recover a file, so let's say that under /etc, there was a file that has become corrupt and I'd like to get a copy of it, then let's just choose one at random, choose bash.bashrc, the bash global pro configuration file, and we can click on download and oh, okay. We can click on download and it's actually downloaded it into my downloads directory. Okay, and you might think, well, why doesn't it just restore it? Well, it's actually, it might seem obvious, let's restore it, but it probably is better to download it to your local machine. Then if it's a text file or something, you can actually check it, look at it, and then you simply upload it to the machine if that's what you want to do. I think that's the logic behind that. So that's a file restore, and that's good. But what if we'd lost this virtual machine altogether? So we can't go to Ubuntu 01 and say, restore the machine, do a full restore, because it's not there anymore. It's gone. Well, it may have gone, but its backups remain. So if we go to PBS 01, okay, and if we have a look here, and again, I'm going to have to move my head. If we look here, we can search for a particular backup. So I would like to search for Ubuntu-01. Now, if I just put Ubuntu, then it will still find all of the backups. So you can see Ubuntu 2, 3, 4, etc. So I can be ambiguous or exactly specific. and we can see here the backups only for Ubuntu hyphen oh 01. And from there, I can actually choose a backup and I can do a complete restore from that backup. So I can restore it now. It's very configurable here. Now, if I restored it now, um, the machine does exist. It cannot use the same virtual machine ID. In fact, invariably, it doesn't give you the same virtual machine ID that I had before. But that's okay because you can actually edit that. So if before it had been VMID 2001, for instance, I can choose that as long as it's not currently in use. Also, I can change its name. So I can call this test hyphen restore. Now, bear in mind that normally you wouldn't change its name because you want to get the machine back that you lost. Um, so you can see it's very configurable. I could increase the amount of memory, increase the amount of CPUs. I can choose to start after a restore. I'm not going to. No, I think I'm using DHCP on these because I was lazy when I created them. But bear in mind if you do what I'm doing here, which is effectively restore the machine when it already exists, you could have IP clashes, etc. This storage is saying, where do you want me to recover it to? So, and the answer to that is, well, I want to put it on my where it was originally. So I could change where it's going to be put. So I could put it in my local data store, but I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to say leave it as from backup configuration because that will put it back to where it was. All right, so let's do this now. I've got a 100 megabit network in here. I've got a cheap and nasty little switch down here, which I keep meaning to replace. So this will take a while. So we'll start it off and we'll just watch that it is actually working. But I'm going to pause, obviously, because it'll take a moment. That has succeeded, and it took 76 seconds. And by the way, it restored all 32 gigabytes. This is not a thin recovery in the sense that it didn't just recover the data that's being used, it recovered the whole virtual machine, including areas that aren't used because you might be using them as raw storage, and Proxmox Backup doesn't know that. So it assumes you want it all back. So it took quite a long time, but it worked fine. Appears to have worked fine anyway. It says it worked fine. And we now have a machine called test-restore. If we have a look at that, go on the console, connect to it, we can see that it's a little bit upset about the network. Maybe I did use fixed IP, so maybe there's a network clash. But you can see the machine has restored and that will recover. So we can see, actually, I'm already logged in on Ubuntu 01, and that's come up successfully. I mean, that's still running successfully, I should say. Let's actually quickly test whether its network interface is happy with life. And it can ping the BBC, and if you can ping the BBC, then whoa, life's fine. So we've successfully recovered our Proxmox backup server. Hopefully you found that interesting. So the idea was an installation is really quite simple to do, but I wanted to show you how you could recover from a disaster and actually, add users and configure it reasonably properly, the way it should be done, i.e., using a non-privileged user for your backups and things like that. Fine. So what we need to do now is move on to looking at scheduling our backups, which is the next phase in this short lesson. Well, I've asked you nicely, but I think there comes a point where, quite honestly, I'm going to have to start using my special Unix powers. So either subscribe and like now, or I'm going to use those powers to turn you into a womble. Don't risk it. Subscribe now. You know it makes sense. All right, a pretty straightforward topic, although potentially quite confusing. And because it's potentially quite confusing, Proxmox have actually given us a number of tools to double check that what we've scheduled is what we meant. And we're not kidding ourselves, and therefore not doing backups when we thought we were. To schedule a backup, go to Data Center, Backup, and then you'll see a list of your schedules. So you may have more than one. So you might have a different schedule for your development environment versus your production environment. Okay. You might have different schedules for different sites, etc., etc. Okay, so I've created a schedule here. It's an example schedule. I'm not saying that it's particularly good or particularly bad. It's just an example. And what I'm hoping to do is, without confusing you or myself, just demonstrate how this works. Then you can simply modify it to suit your requirements. So I double clicked on it, which is the same as clicking on edit, by the way. And what I've said is this basically says the node that this backup should run on, that's the physical PVE node. And I've said all. All right. What is the storage that I wish to back up to? Well, obviously, I've chosen my Proxmox backup server. You could choose other storage, but this is idealized for Proxmox backup server. My schedule, I'm saying that I wish to do one at 2 a.m. and one at 10:30. Okay, p.m. obviously. Well, not obviously, but it is. It's a 24-hour clock, is what I'm trying to say in my normal gibberish way. But you'll see they've got all sorts of example schedules. Now, you don't have to stick to these. We will see the syntax shortly. You can literally just type something else in completely different in here. So we could change this to say 2 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Okay. So that would schedule a job at 2 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the evening. If you want to specify a specific minute, sorry, I was going to put 30, um, then you can do using a colon separator between hours and minutes. So I originally had that, so I'll leave that as it was. The actual syntax of this schedule is the same as that used by System D, and that's probably one of the confusing things. The actual syntax is quite confusing, potentially. But let's have a look at another. Monday to Friday hourly, for instance, we're saying here Monday dot dot Friday. Okay, dot dot in the world of Linux typically means a range. I want to back up from Monday through to Friday, and the next specifier is how often do I want to back up? Well, what this says is once every hour. So if I wanted to do something weird like once every 1.5 hours, then I would fill in the minutes section. If I just put one, whoops, like that, that would mean every minute. I don't think you want that. Okay. All right. So we'll just stick with the original one, which was 2:30 and 10:30. Okay. So we can schedule there. And probably the easiest way to do it is to choose one of the pre-configured schedules and then modify it to your requirements, should you need to, if it doesn't quite do what you want. Okay, selection mode simply says all, which means I want to back up all VMs as specified in this schedule, or I could have multiple schedules where I wanted different uh, uh, scheduling frequencies for different VMs, in which case I'd say either include these VMs or exclude these VMs. So I can schedule, so if I do include these VMs, I could say, all right, I just want to include these 4 VMs, and that would then do just that. It would only back up those 4 VMs. And if I chose excludes selected VMs, it would do the opposite, obviously. So sorry, I'm because I'm pointing out the obvious, which is slightly annoying. Okay, so and we're using snapshot mode, which is the copy on write, if you recall. So that means that the virtual machine continues running. The backup might take quite a long time, and if this is a production environment, the machine will freeze if we were to not use snapshot. The options are suspend. Okay, so the suspend would effectively freeze the virtual machine, or stop, which would literally stop the virtual machine. In other words, shut it down. And so that there may be times when this is essential depending on what your application is, but typically we would choose snapshot. That's your choice. Okay. Then we can specify who's going to be informed about this. Okay, so we can typically we'd send an email. So, well, actually, you get a little bit annoyed if you kept getting emails every 2 hours if you were doing 2 hour backups. So it's entirely up to you what you want to do here. If I specify a particular group of users or user, then I can actually specify on failure only. So that might be a valid choice, actually. Yeah, send me an email if something goes wrong. Retention period, there is a keep all backups button. I hope you have an infinite amount of space to be able to store them all. So typically we simply keep a reduced number of backups. Remember, these are differential backups, so each backup isn't colossal. It's not the entire machine or anything. It's simply the difference between the state it was in now and the state it was in when we last backed up. So I've come up with some sort of weird procedure here, and I want to show you a tool that will help us understand exactly what the hell I've done here. I've said keep the last 14. Well, we're doing 2 a day, and I've said keep the last 14. That's 2 weeks. So what that actually means is we're going to have 2 weeks of 2 a day backups. So we're going to be able to go back to either 2 o'clock in the morning or 10:30 at night for every day for the last 14 days. And then I've said keep 14 days worth of backups. Well, 14 days is 2 weeks. Okay, so we will have a, a whole week because keep last 14, 2 backups a day is 1 week. So we'll have a full week of twice a day. Then we'll have another additional week of simply once a day. And then I've said keep weekly full. So we're going to have a full month of weekly backups after our first 2 weeks of more detailed backups. And then I've said keep 6 months worth, and we could go on and say keep yearly, etc., or even keep hourly, as you can see. This becomes potentially confusing. It's like, what the hell have I done here? What have I set up? So I'm not going to save this because I've got an example of how to determine what this means. So I don't want to change it. Okay, so oh, advanced is advanced, but in here you can enable the fleecing. And what fleecing is, I was thinking I'd already mentioned this, but I haven't yet, have I? Fleecing is the most bizarre name. I'm sure it means something to someone, but this uses copy on write, in other words, a snapshot. The problem with that is the write bit comes along. So your virtual machine says, I want to write to this block. The backup server says, hang on a minute, we haven't backed that up yet. So it will say, right, I'll back that block up now, and then you can overwrite it. But backing up to the Proxmox backup server over the network could cause serious latency, potentially, depending on the performance of your backup of your network. So fleecing is caching. I don't know why they call it fleecing. Somebody tell me in the comments below. But fleecing is caching, so you can have a local high speed or fast storage like your LVM or something on your NVMe, where when you're doing a copy on write, you actually write to the local storage first. You then allow the VM to continue writing to its virtual disk and therefore continue to run, otherwise it would be blocked on I/O. And then we'll flush the cache into the Proxmox backup server. So that's what fleecing is. Okay, so I haven't enabled that, and typically you don't actually. It's sort of more if you have a fairly remote Proxmox backup server. Right, so that's the schedule. So first of all, let's actually look what's it done at a lower level. I'm across on Transam and we're in etc. PVE. We'll find there is a job called a file called jobs.cfg. So let's look at it. And in there we have the configuration file for our schedule that we've just created. And the really nice thing is it's really, really readable. So it says the schedule is 2 o'clock in the morning, 10:30 at night. What are we going to actually back up? All machines, all is set to 1. If we'd chosen specific virtual machines, it would say VMID, and then it would have a comma separated list of virtual machines. Fleecing we have not enabled, so fleecing 0. What mode are we using? Snapshot. Then we can put notes in there, and the notes by default is just the name of the virtual machine that's being backed up. We've said we chose the default for notifications, which is use the global configuration for notifications. We've said prune backups, and we've said keep 14 daily backups. We've said keep the last 14, which means we're going to have 2 per day for 1 week, if you remember. Keep monthly 6, so we're going to keep 6 months, and keep weekly 4, so we're going to have daily backups for a month. But don't forget, we're going to have 6 months. This is what I say about it. They seem to conflict with each other, but they don't. The rule basically is if you look at something and think that looks as though it is going to do 7 days of backups, and it also seems to say it won't, it will always do the most backups that you've defined, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's one thing. Jobs.cfg is a really interesting place to go and have a look at. Okay, the other thing we can look at is tab 3. We can look at something that Proxmox provide. Like I say, I think they realise that it's potentially confusing, and they provide a prune simulator. I'll put the URL at the bottom of the screen, but it's just proxmox.com in the docs directory, prune-simulator. Okay, so and here I've set up exactly what we've got on the other machine, on Transam, I beg your pardon, the schedule. So here I've got Monday through Sunday. They're all selected because they're all blue. You can deselect. So if I just wanted to do it during the week, you could deselect them and then they'd be white. So I'll reselect them. I want it to look as exactly the same as my schedule. The number, and I've put the backup schedule at 2:30 and 22:30. And again, we've got a pull down menu with various options which don't match those in the data center example, but that's okay because we can just overwrite these. We can just, as in the web UI, we can simply type stuff in here, whatever we want. Okay. And if we get our syntax wrong, it will actually come up and give us a clue as to what we've done wrong. The number of weeks here is slightly confusing because it's nothing to do with the schedule. This is the number of weeks in the display below. So we've got a display below, which is going to tell us exactly what we've set up. So that's nothing to do with backups or anything. It's simply what you can see on the screen. If I've made a change, we would then click Update Schedule, and it would update the schedule, and that's fine. Here we've got our prune options, or our retention. On the web UI, it calls it retention period. So here we can say we want to keep the last 14 the last 14 backups, regardless of whether it's daily, hourly, or whatever. Just keep the last 14 backups. We want to keep 14 daily backups. We want to keep 4 weekly backups, and we want to keep 6 monthly backups. So that matches exactly what I've got. You can change these on the fly. So if we look down here, you can see my 7 keep last. Sorry, 7 days worth of keep last. So if I increase that, you can see if you look below, I'll now decrease it. Okay, that's now gone to 8 days. You can see it changing dynamically. So you only have to click Update Schedule when you make a change to the actual schedule itself. The retention period you can mess around with, which is really neat because, like I say, it is potentially confusing. You could set up a backup schedule that wasn't doing what you thought it was doing. So here we've got a week's worth of twice a day, a further a further 2 weeks worth of daily backups. We've got 4 weeks worth of weekly backups, and we've then got our 6 monthly backups. Oh, by the way, their colors match. So blue is the monthly, green is the weekly, yellow is the daily, and orange is the keep last. Okay, so that's really cool. Basically, that is the schedules. This tool is really useful to us. Obviously, we can see the schedule within here, or the schedules in here, and I also, because I kind of like being at the CLI, like the fact that we can go and look directly at the configuration file itself. Backup schedules. Wonderful. Go do it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that session. It went on a bit longer than I meant, but my videos always do. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I did. I just love playing with tech. Next, I may take a short break from Proxmox. I do want to cover a few more topics, believe it or not. But we've done 11 episodes up to now. So I'm thinking of doing Logical Volume Manager. In fact, anything Linux related that you would like me to cover, please put a comment. And if I have the relevant knowledge, I'd love to do it. Okay, at this point, I'd like to apologise for my evil twin, Big Dave. He means well, he's a good lad, but I asked him to help me get more subscribers, and of course he interpreted it in his usual way. Alright guys, see you on the next one. Thank you for watching. Oh, by the way, please do subscribe. Bye.